21. Stephen Bauer graces our screen in Something Unforgivable, which is always a treat. The contrast between Lalo's exuberance and flamboyance and Nacho's intense, reserved nature is fantastic. The scene at Fireside between the two is particularly heart-pumping, as is the fantastic and clever Lalo-centric action sequence, while the Jimmy Kim storyline is interesting in regard to character and character development. The episode concludes with this foreboding feeling, as what has been the typical Jimmy Kim roles have now been reversed, as a tentative, clearly concerned Jimmy stares in a now unpredictable Kim's direction, evidently unsure of the lengths Kim is willing to go in regard to legality or lack thereof. 20. It's always great to see the scene-stealing Ray Cruz in this role. The dynamic between Tuco and Nacho is bloody fantastic. It's as if Nacho is a largely composed dog owner trying to keep his unstable ticking time bomb of a pit bull at bay. Tuco's ultimate encounter with Mike is brutal but entertaining, as well as kind of fun and humorous, in regard to Mike playing the part of this oblivious grandpa in order to bait Tuco. 19. This episode goes full Breaking Bad, if you will. We get a classic cartel scene at Eladio's poolside, and the episode in general quite heavily deals in Gus versus Hector matters, which is always top-tier TV. 18. The musical opening, consisting of a lovely instrumental version of Something Stupid, is a beautiful follow-up to the 407 opening montage, though it delivers the opposite message/tone. The 407 opening depicted a gradual drifting apart in regard to the romantic relationship between Jimmy and Kim, although throughout much of it the two are physically together, whilst in the 509 opening, the pair are geographically very distant from one another, though the love between them, toxic or not, is stronger than ever. The final scene is one of Kim's greatest moments, as she bravely stands up to Lalo, completely unaware of the fact that she is under the protection of Mike's sniper. 17. Carrot and Stick brings us the personally uplifting, long-anticipated return of the hilarious and ridiculous Kettlemans. Kim's verbal takedown of Betsy in particular is brilliant and rather intimidating. Foreboding is the word I'd use to sum up my feelings during the episode's final Kim and Jimmy moments. They depart the Kettlemans' establishment before a vehicle begins to slowly follow behind them. All of the Nacho material is exceedingly intense. It's viscerally nerve-wracking, the moments leading up to Nacho knocking out his initially hidden observer. Nacho's standoff against Marco and Lionel is thrilling and badass, as is Mike standing up to Gus and the gun-wielding Tyrus, only after locking himself in a room with the two of them when Gus threatens the safety of Ignacio's father. 16. We get a perfectly fittingly fun and trepidation-inducing introduction to the great Lalo Salamanca. Everything regarding the defense of Mr. Babineau is both creative and hilarious, namely the scene in which Jimmy, playing the role of a New Orleans pastor, and his college crew take calls from Suzanne Erickson, as Suzanne looks at phonied-up online pictures of a seemingly heroic and holy volunteer in Huel. 15. Saul Goodman delivers one of his most magnificent, magnetic performances here after some wonderfully and humorously depicted preparation leading up to said performance. He entertainingly and condescendingly owns a room packed with heavies within their respective fields, who are left stunned and speechless before Mr. Goodman savagely and gleefully whistles as he exits this suddenly silent boardroom. Peak television. We then end with a twist of a cliffhanger, as we're expecting a heart-wrenching breakup between Jimmy and Kim, but instead we get a proposal from Miss Wexler. 14. We get the interesting origins of the classic Breaking Bad bell, of course belonging to Hector, while Odenkirk and Seahorn are wonderful and genuine in their high stakes in regard to their relationship scenes. I've always been drawn to what was the very wholesome friendship between Mike and Mr. Ziegler. Of course, the awesome Werner's escape-centric cliffhanger throws a wrench into the works in that department. 13. The slick and versatile direction really stands out here. Figures Mr. Vince Gilligan is seated in the director's chair. Gus's final showdown against Lalo is badass, as are his bold words directed toward Eladio, to whom Lalo plans on gifting this camera and the tape within it. All of this adding even more effectiveness to Gustavo's eventual triumph over the Don and so many of the Salamancas in Breaking Bad. The final burial scene is eerily beautiful and impeccably scored, as Jonathan Banks delivers this beautifully subtle and melancholy facial performance. 12. Gus's ominous and engrossing monologue at an unconscious Hector's bedside is utterly brilliant. It perfectly encapsulates Gus's deep disdain toward Hector. The final piñata scene is fucking badass. It's so satisfying watching Saul, Huel, and the Mountain Man from episode 109 force these thieving hooligans to absolutely piss their pants in fear in exceptionally creative and colorful fashion. 11. Waterworks is exceptionally written and directed by Breaking Bad creator Vince Gilligan. Ray Seahorn brings her perpetually awesome performance to new heights here. No matter how stony-faced she may initially appear on the surface, her eyes just swim with complex emotion. The scene between Kim and Cheryl, as Cheryl reads the truth of what happened to Howard, is masterfully executed. The lack of sound, the sporadic inserts of key points of Howard's transcribed tragic story as Cheryl learns it. The continuation of Jean's scam is fun and tense, and Marion discovering Jean's true identity is just artistic perfection, in part due to the ironic fact that she cracked the code on the laptop that was purchased for her with money made from the scam that Jean concocted. We also get this brilliant kind of mirroring moment. In the first scene of the series, we get a glimpse of a black and white Jean watching old Better Call Saul commercials, the television's reflection in its glasses appearing in color, while in Waterworks, when Jean catches Marion viewing an old Saul commercial, the only aspect of the screen that appears in color is, again, the reflection of the commercial in Jean's glasses. Why is the commercial the only colored aspect of Mr. Takovic's otherwise colorless world? I mean, there's certainly this element that Saul Goodman led a literally colorful, fast, wild, wealthy life, whereas Jean Takovic is this depressed, paranoid man, initially reluctant to take chances anymore, missing the glory days. He's a shell of his former self, so the lack of color is perfectly fitting. The technical reason for the saturated glasses reflection is the fact that each of the three primary personas within three distinct parts of our titular character's life is presented through a different colored filter. The past of Slip and Jimmy McGill is presented through this sort of blue tint. The present of Jimmy McGill, before he ultimately becomes Saul Goodman, is presented in Technicolor, whereas the post-Breaking Bad timeline starring Gene Takovic is presented in black and white. 10. Saul Gone really is an excellent series finale. In fact, this episode, alongside multiple components of Season 6 Part 2 in general, is a satisfying send-off to both BCS and its parent series. It's beautifully written and constructed, delving deeply and captivatingly into the theme of regret. A number of returning players from both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul are organically woven into the story. Walt, Marie, Bill Oakley, Suzanne Erickson, and of course the great Charles McGill. I love this ending for our titular character, which I was definitely not anticipating. Saul Goodman's greatest trick that he's pulled on me in particular was him, Jimmy, being genuinely repentant and honest. This atonement coming as a surprise in large part due to the fact that it is, in this instance, gravely to Jimmy's detriment, which is what assures that you know for a fact that Mr. McGill is truly repentant, whether or not you believe redemption is possible for this character. 9. Bagman is a sensational two-man show starring Jimmy and Mike. The first sniper-centric scene, one of Mr. Ehrmantraut's most badass moment in either of these shows, is enthralling and chaotic. The cinematography is slick as can be, and the sound design is so cool and visceral. The second sniper-centric scene is cinematic and extremely intense. The cinematography is brilliantly immersive and stunning, as are an abundance of shots within this episode. All of the conversations had in the desert, as our duo do their utmost to survive, are at times humorous, at times quite powerful. Bob Odenkirk cracks me up in a number of instances here, including the moment in which an utterly defeated Jimmy refuses to drink his own urine because he doesn't want someone stumbling across a corpse with a mouthful of piss, while Mike's monologue about living solely for his remaining family is poignant and perfectly performed by the brilliant Banks. 8. JMM is packed with wonderful moments. We get the brilliant shot of the Pollos Hermanos bursting into flames over a stoic Gus Fring's shoulder. We also get the sensational scene in which the out-of-line, deluded Jimmy flips the fuck Chuck out and verbally rips Howard apart. Odenkirk is particularly excellent here. We also get the fabulous scene in which Kim displays her immense skill as a lawyer. As one moment, she and Saul's names are being quietly reamed by Kevin Wachtel. The next, Kim is calmly and completely turning the tables on Kevin, smugly laying out to him that what he just stated to be Kim's faults were actually his own. It is one of Miss Wexler's finest moments. We even get a small, ambiguous but intriguing taste of Gus's mysterious past alongside Peter Schuler. I also love this episode's title and its utilization in not only this particular piece, but just the series in general. Let's briefly, no pun intended, talk briefcase origins. Kim purchases it for Jimmy around the time he was reinstated as a lawyer, though as Miss Wexler states, she initially wasn't aware that she was purchasing a briefcase for Jimmy's new and official identity, Saul Goodman, so she had Jimmy McGill's initials printed on the case. Jimmy kind of sarcastically says that the JMM can instead represent his new motto, Justice Matters Most, which is quite ironic. Then in this particular episode, this motto is brought up when Jimmy is sat opposite Lalo, at which point Eduardo tells Jimmy that he needs a new motto, just make money, which for the vast majority of Jimmy's life is his true motto. 7. Episode 310 is an exceptionally strong season finale. The lantern imagery here is truly tragic. It shows up in the finale's beginnings and its end. In the opening scene, we move toward and are engulfed by the light of the lantern, while a young Chuck reads Jimmy the same book that Jimmy referenced to Chuck in the season 3 premiere. Then we see the light of the lantern nearing episode's end, right before it's knocked off a table by Chuck, as he and his home are shortly consumed by flames. This lantern represents Chuck's condition, his childhood with Jimmy, his resentment toward his brother. It represents Chuck himself, who goes up in the flames of a fire he started. The scene in which Chuck is finally pushed out of HHM by Howard and is forced to depart the establishment in front of hundreds of individuals, obliviously applauding him, is spectacular and overflowing with subtext. Lantern also includes one of my favorite scenes of the series, the one in which Chuck breaks Jimmy emotionally, pushing him a step closer to becoming Saul Goodman. The performances here are small and powerful. Chuck's cruel words, which are definitely untrue, provide a complete and utter gut punch. It's genuinely tragic seeing the sad, toxic, nasty state of this brotherhood. It's even sadder to think that this interaction is the final time these brothers speak to one another before Chuck's death. We also finally witness the moment in which Hector has the stroke that puts him in the wheelchair we had seen in Breaking Bad, only after he's had this ultra-entertaining meltdown, typically terrifically performed by the late great Mark Margolis. 6. Chicanery is, simply put, a masterful hour of television. It sadly perfectly encapsulates the exceedingly complicated and damaged relationship between Jimmy and Chuck. Michael McKean's final monologue is fucking elite, practically all of it being captured in a single shot, as is Jimmy's spectacularly executed plot, which ultimately propels said monologue into motion. Said plot provides us with a perfectly fitting pickpocket-related introduction to Breaking Bad alum Huel Babineau. 5. This episode presents this practically perfectly structured and paced, largely singular story, the final moments of which feature some of the finest acting and writing I've seen on television. I'm referring to the I broke my boy scene, in which Mike tells Stacy the truth about his son Maddie's death and his involvement in the lead up to it. Banks is simply Emmy-worthy in this entirely Mike-centric episode. In fact, I believe this particular performance of his to be his greatest hour ever, portraying the particularly clever and badass Mr. Ehrmantraut. 4. Pimento is an exceedingly important episode. It is the one which contains the game-changing reveal that it hasn't been Howard blocking Jimmy from joining the firm as a lawyer for all these years. It was always the immeasurably vindictive Chuck, and the scene in which Chuck finally speaks the truth on this matter is really powerfully and genuinely performed by McKean and Odenkirk. It's also impeccably written and paced. We also get our introduction to the hilarious dynamic between Mike and the humorously naive Daniel Price Wormold, as well as an immensely entertaining encounter between Mike and Stephen Ogg Sobchak. 3. Rock and Hard Place is an incredibly powerful and emotional roller coaster. Michael Mando is simply sensational in Ignacio's swan song. Vargas' final conversation with his father Manuel is heartbreaking, while Nacho's final monologue is utterly f***ing glorious as he goes out on a shocking and heart-wrenching, though heroic, note. 2. Plan and execution is this masterful amalgamation of the first part of the final season, as Jimmy and Kim's plan to burn Howard to the ground fully and brilliantly reveals itself. In fact, it makes you appreciate the 6 prior episodes of the season even more, as you come to realize how exceptional the very gradual construction of this devious plot has truly been. Patrick Fabian gives this sympathetically unhinged, Emmy-worthy performance in this momentous and mega-effective episode, the final scene of which is one of the most utterly shocking and tragic I've ever watched. It depicts the true collision between the lawyer aspect of the show and the criminal cartel aspect of the show. 1. Winner is a practically perfect episode of television. The opening karaoke scene is not only a humorous, smile-inducing blast to watch, it is also extremely poignant. The classic ABBA tune, The Winner Takes It All, sadly, wonderfully encapsulates the complex and immensely troubled, to say the least, relationship between Jimmy and Chuck. The rat race between Mike and Lalo, it's sensational watching these 2 sharp, persistent, and patient men try to outsmart one another whilst on the hunt for Mr. Ziegler. Werner's tragically inevitable death and the lead up to it, in the form of him being forced to say his last ever words to his wife, is incredibly emotionally effective and ultimately truly visually dazzling. The final sequence is phenomenal. Jimmy seems to finally be sincere during his hearing as he quote-unquote emotionally references his late brother and the letter he received from him. Not only does Jimmy fool the court with this act of his, he fools Kim, who has been tearing up during his big speech. It is foreboding and brilliant as the camera pulls away from a stunned Kim after an invigorated Jimmy has told her that he's going to practice law under a different name. We get the final words of the season as Jimmy struts down the hall away from Kim. It's all good, man.